right? Deuteronomy 20, let's call this one War and Peace, because this chapter deals with what we would call rules of engagement, which would be their rules of warfare. War because it's specifically talking about their warfare, but peace because they were to offer terms of peace to many of the nations other than the 7 they were told to get rid of. They were to offer terms of peace to the nations that God gave them permission to wage war against. And so starting off with the war, the candor that we talked about from the last chapter, chapter 19, really carries over to their rules of engagement, because God is going to tell them not to fear, because they're going to be going against some nations, cities, towns, people that are greater than they are. We've heard about that before, getting up to this point. He's saying it's going to happen again. But after God tells the people not to fear in those situations, the priests are specifically to go to the people and tell them not to fear. But if the priests aren't able to make all the men confident, the officers are then to go to the men and ask them for candor, because anyone who is afraid is really given an exemption, because ultimately that fear can spread. And we know in the new covenant, the role of faith is huge in the life of a believer. And this is an old covenant principle that can help us understand some of the foundations of faith and how it's important to God. Stories like this can help us understand how important God takes our ability to trust the things that he's telling us are possible. It's one thing if we're out on our own. We should probably be afraid if we're just making up our own potential, our own ceiling, without regard to reality. But insofar as we understand what God is calling us to do, he wants us to be confident in many ways, possibly similar to what we're seeing out of the call to his soldiers, to be honest, so that you can find your place. This battle might not be for you, but he needs the soldiers who are confident moving forward. Likewise, when we are afraid, it'd probably be helpful for us to be candid about that, so God can help us to overcome that fear, so that we can move forward in the confidence that we should have in the things that he has designated for us. But moving forward here, when they go to a city, they are to offer terms of peace to any cities they wage war against that are not those 7 nations that God has designated for destruction, as they are clearing the land of Canaan. And so it carries forward into the 3rd section, where we're talking about the way in which they're supposed to conduct battle. It doesn't seem like they're supposed to arbitrarily just destroy and pillage. In particular, he's going to talk about the trees and the degree to which they're supposed to take care of the trees even in the land. They can cut down trees and build siege works, but they're not supposed to just randomly destroy the trees that are good for food. They're supposed to take care of the land. And so ultimately, when we're looking at God's rules for his people, even in a time of war, God expects what we would call decorum. And decorum is a word that we use for properly setting boundaries and using self-discipline in times even of extreme violence. And so it's interesting to see that goes down even to the way that they're supposed to treat the land in the places they are allowed to invade. And so going back to the beginning, we need a takeaway. There are times when our burden in life is heavy enough, and so heavy that we don't need the additional burden of pretense. And so even in a time when it can be easy for men to want to show bravado, God is calling for his men to show honesty. Why? Because he is in the process of getting us from where we are to where we need to be, and to the degree we're concealing our genuine fears. Not so much in a time when we're around those who would exploit our fears, but when God is calling us to be candid. We are in a lot of ways slowing down the process of God getting us where we need to be, even in a time of war. Once again, it's why we say his best to you as you go forward with him. God willing, being honest about the places in which you fear and need help.